We know there are many choices in internet radio, and the staff and host of LA Talk Live would like to thank you for choosing the internet's hottest destination for the most eclectic sound and invigorating talk. This is LA Talk Live. We are more than just talk.
Welcome to LA Progressive Live, where we delve deep into progressive politics and issues of social justice. I'm your host, Dick Price, and joining me on my right is my co-host and wife, Sharon Kyle. LA Progressive Live is an extension of laprogressive.com, an online social justice daily magazine that covers the issues mainstream media avoids. We've got an interesting lineup today. The focus, the many shades of activism. So let's jump in, and then we'll introduce our guests in a bit. Sharon?
Thanks, Dick. So, activism. So we're going to have a conversation today about activism and the various forms of activism that people can get engaged in. One of the reasons we're having this show, right, Dick, is because we are always telling people to get involved. I even think that there's a song that we play on our show that says, get involved, get involved, get involved. But it occurred to me that there are many people who don't even know how to begin to get involved. So what we're going to be talking about, we're going to introduce a couple of activists on this show that are our guests, in-studio guests, one who I'm calling an accidental activist, and another one who is a seasoned activist who has been out there in the trenches for almost 50 years. But before we introduce them, I want to talk about the many ways that a person can become active. So I'm going to have to put my glasses on. Okay, so there's various shades of activism, and some might call this civic engagement. I actually believe that if you are an adult living in this country, that it is incumbent upon you to be involved to some degree, either to be registered to vote, but if you're not, you don't have the status that would allow you to be registered to vote, there's lots of other ways to get involved. Getting out the vote, signing a petition, writing a letter to the editor, running for office, boycotting. Oh my gosh, there are so many ways that you can have your voice heard. The reason that this country has existed for as long as it has existed is because, by the way, we have the oldest democracy in the country, in the world. And one of the reasons that it has existed for as long as it has is because people have been engaged at various levels for the past couple hundred years. However, recently, it seems that people have been relying on the professional political class to handle all of our decision making for us. So, in talking about the various ways that you can get involved, I was doing a little bit of research and learned that in certain parts of the world, particularly in Europe or in Scandinavia, like in Norway, Sweden, and Finland, people are much more civically engaged than they are in the United States. People seriously believe that they should shape their communities, that it's their responsibilities to make sure that the politicians are doing what they were in fact elected to do. It's their responsibility, the citizenry's responsibility, to hold the politicians' feet to the fire. And I frankly believe that no matter how wonderful a politician is when they're elected into office, if they're elected and you just kind of walk away and you're not really paying attention to what they're doing and you don't hold their feet to the fire, then you are a part of the problem. It is part of your, it is because of you that things don't quite go the way you would think they should go.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a fascinating question of why some people get involved in their community activities and others don't. As you know, part of the reason 7 years ago that we started the LA Progressive is that in one off-cycle election in our neck of the woods, Highland Park and Mount Washington, just 8% of the people turned out to vote. And in this recent national election, in some states, only 30% of the people chose to vote. So why do some people get involved, even at the level of just voting and then complaining about what the politicians do? And why do some really throw themselves into it, like our two guests have? So last week we had a good example, a good template for why some people get involved. Hundreds of workers from throughout California gathered at 2 Walmart stores, and many of them sat down in the aisles, put tape over their mouths, say strike. They closed down an intersection. They rallied outside the store. They closed an intersection, and 28 of them were arrested. And and you think now certainly there was union organizing going on behind that. Certainly paid organizers were rallying the troops and trying to organize Walmart stores. But the people who actually got arrested and put the tape over their mouths 6 months or 6 years ago, when they went to Walmart to get a job, they were probably just getting the best job they could get in their neck of the woods, and have spent the time since trying to figure out how to make ends meet on the little bit of money that Walmart pays with no benefits. And part of the reason they were up in arms is Walmart has adopted a policy that everybody that works for them has to work the holidays. So every Thanksgiving, none of them get to be with their families. So
one of my issues is there are people who, they don't work at Walmart. They make well over minimum wage, and so they're not concerned. Yet what they do that contributes to this problem is they shop at Walmart. Now, slavery existed in this country for a long time, and there have been many that have contended that if there was a serious boycott on cotton, slavery would have ended a long time before it did.
Yeah. So we had another good example. I mean, you're going to talk a little bit about the ACLU workshop that we organized this weekend, where you told your story at great and moving length about what the personal tragedy in your life that compelled your activism. And different people are compelled by tragedy or opportunity. So it was interesting to hear that story.
Okay, so I'm just going to be very brief because, this is a show and we are trying to stick to a schedule here.
Yeah, I know.
So, all right, so we did a training and I talked about the tragedy that led me into activism. I was raised in the Bronx and I had very, very close friends. When I left the Bronx, I moved to Southern California, became an adult, got a job at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory where I worked for more than 20 years. But during that 20-year period, I maintained contact with the people that I loved and the people that I was raised with. And one of those people was a young man who couldn't find a job and was found that he had to resort to dealing in drugs. And he was arrested for a nonviolent crime. And he was convicted, and what he didn't know was that there was mandatory sentencing. He was urged to cop a plea. He did not, and he was sentenced to 27 years in a federal penitentiary. He was arrested in Washington, D.C. His name is Robin, and Robin and I maintained contact, and for 20 years I wrote to him, and I finally did go visit him at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, where the blinders were taken off of my eyes, and I saw the cruelty that exists in what we call our penitentiary system. Unfortunately, Robin did not make it out alive. I have vowed that for the rest of my life, I will not be silent on the injustices that occur in this country. But you don't have to have a terrible tragedy like that to take your civic engagement seriously. So we're going to take a little break, and we're going to talk to our two guests in about a minute, so stay with us.
From the Indians who welcome the pilgrims, and to the buffaloes who once ruled the plain, like the vultures circling beneath the dark clouds, looking for the rain, looking for the rain. Just like the cities that stagger on the coastline, in a nation that just can't stand much more, like the forest.
We know there are many choices in internet radio, and the staff and host of LA Talk Live would like to thank you for choosing the internet's hottest destination for the most eclectic sound and invigorating talk. This is LA Talk Live. We are more than just talk.
It started out like a totally normal day.
I love you.
I mean, I guess I was a little sweaty and I was definitely sore. I thought I had gas. Turns out I was having a heart attack. Heart disease is the #1 killer of American women. So now I take care of myself and tell the other women in my life to do the same. Make it your mission to save your life and the lives of the women you love. Find out more from the American Heart Association at goredforwomen.org.
Welcome back to LA Progressive Live with your hosts Sharon Kyle and Dick Price. We're streaming live exclusively on latalklive.com and laprogressive.com. Thank you for coming back. So we have some guests in studio that we are really happy to have here with us today because they're going to talk to us about their activism. I'm going to introduce to you Dr. Rhonda Hampton. Dr. Hampton is a psychologist and has been actively engaged, and we're going to talk a little bit to Dr. Hampton about what she's engaged in, but we also have in studio Carlos Montes, and Dick is going to be interviewing Carlos. It's a little bit after we talk to Dr. Hampton. So Dr. Rhonda Hampton, you and I met, a couple of years ago. I don't know if you remember. It was at a forum, I believe, that was given by the ACLU.
Mm-hmm. I do recall.
And it was a pleasure meeting you. But unfortunately, we did meet under unfortunate and tragic circumstances. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your accidental activism and how it is that you've become what you are now?
So a little over 5 years ago, my psychology intern, Maitrice Richardson, was in Malibu. And she was in a restaurant where she was suffering an apparent mental health crisis. And the restaurant staff called the sheriffs to get her evaluated, but instead of taking her for evaluation, they did in fact arrest her after having her car towed with all of her belongings. So while her car was towed on PCH, she was taken up the canyon to a substation in Calabasas. And she, despite the fact that she was still in a mental health crisis, in addition to the fact that she didn't have her keys or any ways of caring for herself, she was released at 12:28 in the morning. Her mother called me the day after, and I remember the moment that her mother called me and said, "Maitrice is missing, and can you help?" In that moment, I just remember not wanting to. I remember not wanting to pick up the phone. I wasn't one to call law enforcement, and she was asking me to call a detective, and I thought, but I could call, even though I didn't feel comfortable doing it. And when I did, the next thing, I knew I was in the middle of just a tragedy.
Yeah, so there was a whirlwind, really. I mean, there was a lot of coverage. I saw there was a television show, not Unsolved Mysteries, but
Disappeared. Yeah.
that focused on her story.
Mm-hmm.
So what ended up happening? What was the outcome?
So after 11 months of searching all over the place, she was eventually found in the canyons of Malibu in a ravine. Her naked skeletal remains were found.
Wow. So her remains, because there were skeletal remains, it was impossible to determine the cause of death?
Well, I think a lot of things made it impossible to determine. Number one, the detectives on the case were at the site, and they removed her remains without calling in the coroner. So there was no ability to photo document what happened. Basically, the coroners could not go in and do their job. And so the detectives actually scooped her body up, put it in the body bag, gathered her clothing, which were in the ravine also, and put it in the body bag, and released her to be buried.
Wow. Now, had the family and you, not engaged with the media, and I know the LA Progressive, we ran several articles. Had that not happened, did mainstream media cover this very much?
I'll tell you what happened is when on that Friday night, after I got off the phone with the detective, and it took me a couple of hours to convince them to do a search. And because they didn't want to release the money, they felt that she was a voluntary missing. And I kept saying, but if she was saying she was from Mars and she was saying she was there to avenge the death of Michael Jackson, she was acting bizarre. She should have been evaluated.
Okay, you said they didn't want to release the money, and they actually were not going to do a search?
No, they had not. So she was missing on that Thursday at about 12:28. I didn't find out until Friday night at about 7 p.m. So I was on the phone with the detective for a few hours, going back and forth, pleading the case of why a search should be done. And they actually did do a search the next morning, Saturday.
Oh my goodness!
But wasn't there a sense because she was missing a long time before they finally found her remains, and wasn't there a sense that both the media and the sheriff's department weren't doing nearly enough to follow up? If she'd been a different person of a different color, they might have called out the National Guard. But as it was, you in particular had to press hard to get any kind of follow up at all.
I'll tell you what happened is that on that Saturday morning, and I don't recall doing this, but apparently I called a local news station, Channel 11, and someone came out on a Saturday and interviewed me, and he told me this is a story that's not going to get any coverage, and he said, I'm going to cover it for you, and after this, he gave me a list of things that I needed to do to try to get coverage, so thank goodness for that cameraman, and he was right, because after that, it was very difficult, number one, to get the coverage, but also to convince the media that there was even a possibility that myself and the family may have been correct in our assertions that the law enforcement did something wrong. So even when it was covered, there was kind of a bent towards believing that what the sheriff said, what they were doing was correct and there was no wrongdoing.
So as a result of that, I understand that your life changed significantly.
Yes, it did.
So I hear that there's a documentary that you have just really gone nonstop since this happened to try to do what? To change what?
Well, first of all, that documentary, the executive producer is Chip Croft, and Chip is a person who came and volunteered within the first week of our search.
And the name of it is Lost Compassion?
It's called Lost Compassion, the Mitrice Richardson story. And it turned into a documentary, but really we were videotaping everything because since the news wouldn't cover us, we just videotaped everything and put it on YouTube. So we have so much footage of so many of the searches and the press conferences that weren't covered in mainstream media. And so about a year ago, we decided let's put it together and make a documentary with the hopes of maybe someone seeing that documentary and compelling them to come forward with information about Mitrice. Also to educate the community of what you can do if a loved one goes missing and how, how to conduct searches and how to keep motivated. So there's a lot in that documentary about how we kept going.
Well, I know I learned a lot. I had no idea that the sheriffs would release someone. She was a very attractive young woman. Her car was impounded by the sheriff, so they knew that she had no access to her car or cell phone or anything, and would release her after midnight out on a dark, deserted road.
And what? I didn't know that either, by the way. And I think if you're not so involved with legal issues, you're not going to know that. But I will tell you, when I would talk about my shock that they would release people in the middle of the night, I heard people all the time telling me that happens all the time.
It does.
And I would say, just because it happens all the time doesn't mean that we can't stop it.
That's right.
So that's really what motivated me to, we got to stop this.
That's right.
This has to stop.
And that is what activism is. And that's why I call you the accidental activist, because you're working to change that.
Yes.
Since I learned about that story, I did just as you said. I learned that this is a common occurrence.
Yes. I'm fortunate. In July of 2014, Carol Liu introduced a bill, SB 833, and originally that bill was introduced in January. And the idea of the bill, which I was not too happy with initially, was that each sheriff would have the opportunity or can voluntarily agree to participate in a program where they would ask an inmate to volunteer to stay in jail. So the sheriff could do this voluntarily if they want to, which means each sheriff can make their own decision, and then they can offer this, a place to stay to the individual. And at the time, all over the news, it was touted that this is something that would have helped Mitrice. Well, it wouldn't have helped Mitrice because supposedly they asked Mitrice if she wanted to stay in jail. And because of her compromised mental state, she said no. I'm going to have to give it that maybe they really did. Either they asked her or not, but they say they did, so I'll have to assume that's true. But she didn't take them up on the offer. Right now, I've been working with Assistant Sheriff Terry McDonald since that bill has been passed. How can we make that? How can we make it more likely that people would be able to maybe stay in the jail just enough time to get to secure a ride home or to secure safety? There were parts of that bill that I did fight in the beginning, and I felt that amendments needed to be made, and they were. So once the amendments were made, I do, in a way, I do support it for the most part. There's people that it won't help, but there are people that it might help, and so to that end, I'm willing to lend my advice to the assistant sheriff to get that going. So
now, is there any part of policy where it's required that sheriff or law enforcement call in a psychiatric emergency team?
Of course, yes. You know, in Mitrice's case and in many cases where people are even believed to have, it doesn't even have to be a mental illness, that there's a mental health crisis, a professional needs to be called in. And that would be a PET team, a psychiatric emergency team, to take them to a facility that can conduct a 5150 evaluation. By the way, law enforcement only recommends for a 5150 evaluation. They are not trained to assess whether or not someone qualifies. All they are expected to do is to recognize behaviors that might be unusual, and they can recommend that they be evaluated for a 5150. And in Mitrice's case, if you say you're from Mars, then you need to be taken in to be evaluated by a professional.
Now, but the recommendation is at their discretion.
It's unfortunately at their discretion.
But they had to know that releasing an attractive young woman in the middle of the night up in the mountains, a long way away from public transportation, well, they had a mental impairment to not understand that was a totally unreasonable thing to do.
You know, either they willfully or who knows why they did that. I mean, I have many thoughts that go in my mind about why that happened.
Oh,
So has, in all this time, this was the LA County Sheriff's Department.
Yes.
Have they admitted any wrongdoing? Have they apologized in any official way?
No,
they haven't.
No, they have not. There was a lawsuit that was settled, but that lawsuit was really about the removal of her body against the remains of the coroners.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So in removing her body, they violated some policy. They didn't follow a established procedure.
Exactly. And in addition to that, the coroners, although it was the detectives who removed her body, we were fortunate enough to meet a forensic anthropologist in the time that she had gone missing. And I had asked her, you know, I have such a distrust for the system at this point that when we find her body, and I know we will, would you be willing to come in and do a forensic evaluation? And she agreed to do that. And she was in England at the time that Mitrice's body was found. So on the day of Mitrice's funeral, about 4 hours before the funeral, she flew in, she unzipped the body bag. Mitrice's clothing was still in that body bag, never even taken to the crime lab for evaluation, and Mitrice's body was not appropriately analyzed even by the coroner's office. So we went ahead and, you know, buried her and let the funeral go on, and then we had to fight for exhumation.
What a sad, sad story. Now, I think before we went live, you were saying that you did not define yourself as an activist. But boy, it sure sounds like you're an activist to me. What was your life like before this happened?
I had a very nice life. I'm a psychologist, and I was in private practice, and I had just reached that point in my practice where I had hired on a couple psychologists with me, and I was going to kind of relax a little bit. I'm a Girl Scout leader, so I was, you know, really throwing myself into the work with my girls. I have a daughter. At the time, she was 6 when Mitrice went missing, and I have a wonderful husband. So, you know, I had a nice life. I fought for that life, and I was very happy with that life and very satisfied with that life.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Now I have a different life.
You have a different life, but I'm sure this was an eye-opening experience.
Yes, it was life-changing.
I think I read that your documentary has been accepted to the Sundance Film Festival.
Wow.
And you're talking to network executives?
It has not been accepted. It's been submitted to the Sundance Film Festival, so we will find out in the next couple of weeks. And yes, it is being reviewed by a pretty large network, so we're pretty excited about that.
Do we have to wait to view it? Is it any place available?
You know what? We might be able to talk about that.
Okay. Off camera. All right. So, well, we want to thank you so much. We're going to take a little break right now, but I just would like to close briefly, and we'll come back from break, just by saying I believe that what you're doing will save lives, and I want to thank you for being the accidental activist.
Thank you.
Just don't let the spin get you down. Things are moving fast. Hold on tight and you will last.
We know there are many choices in internet radio, and the staff and host of LA Talk Live would like to thank you for choosing the internet's hottest destination for the most eclectic sound and invigorating talk. This is LA Talk Live. We are more than just talk.
Hi, this is Dr. Levi, your fitness doctor, making a personal house call, inviting you to join me Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific for my all-new show, The Dr. Levi Show. Join us as we discuss fitness, health, and well-being, including emotional and spiritual health. So don't forget to tune in to The Dr. Levi Show every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, exclusively on latalklive.com and the Talk Live Broadcast Network. You can also catch us on iTunes, Radio R&B, or watch us on Ustream.tv, or catch us on the Live 365 network, and now on Radio Flag and Stitcher Radio. Reality radio handcrafted for your listening pleasure. This is LA Talk Live, and we are more than just talk.
Hi, this is Starlet Quarles, and I'm inviting you to join us every Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m. for a new show right here on LA Talk Live, The Dialogue, Real Talk, Real People. Join us as we discuss the topics that are relevant to today's generational leaders. So don't forget to tune in to The Dialogue, Real Talk, Real People, every Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m. right here on latalklive.com. You can also catch us on iTunes Radio R&B, Live 365, Radio Flag, and now Stitcher Radio. Or watch and listen directly at latalklive.com. Reality radio handcrafted for your listening pleasure. This is LA Talk Live, and we are more than just talk.
Welcome back to LA Progressive Live with your hosts Sharon Kyle and Dick Price. You're joining us live streaming at LA Talk Live. If Dr. Rhonda Hampton was the accidental activist, our next guest, Carlos Montes, is going on 47 years of pretty steady activism, starting in the earliest days as one of the founders of the Brown Berets, active in the Chicano blowouts
Sure.
of
Brownout sounds good.
of high schools in East LA. Why don't we start there? Tell us about when you were a kid and you were first got involved in activism and why.
Sure. Well, I mean, facing the racism and the discrimination in LA was what got me involved, right? But I remember the high school walkouts where thousands of students walked out demanding quality public education, bilingual education, ethnic studies. That was really inspirational. So I think that motivated me to continue fighting for justice and other issues. We joined the Poor People's Campaign. The walkouts were in March of '68, and a few months later we were in Washington, D.C. for 2 months with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, marching every day with Jesse Jackson, Jose Williams, and so
wow,
yeah,
that's
right.
I mean, those are some awesome memories.
Absolutely.
So how did you get to Washington? I mean, who helped?
On the bus. We were invited. The Martin Luther King wanted to be sure that the Mexicans and the Native Americans were part of the original Poor People's Campaign, the original Rainbow Coalition. Even though the Chicano movement, the Brown Berets, we weren't adherents of nonviolence. We believed in self-defense, as the Black Panther Party did, right? But we were invited. We were on the bus from L.A., Watts, all the way to Washington, D.C. It took us several weeks to get there, but every night we would have a march and a rally. And in D.C., we joined the Resurrection City, where we had, thousands of blacks, Puerto Ricans, white Appalachians. That's where I saw, even whites are poor, right?
That's right. That's right.
Because I grew up in, my parents are originally from Mexico, right? And I grew up in South L.A. and East L.A., where we were all poor, but we were primarily segregated, mostly black and brown families living together.
So was that your first trip across the country?
It was. It sure was.
And was it a real eye opener for you to see that even whites are poor?
No, absolutely, because in the beginning in the '60s we saw the problem as being the white man, right? But once in D.C. we realized that whites were also poor and suffered discrimination.
Yeah,
so it was definitely an eye opener. It really developed my political consciousness.
How did you operate in parallel to the Black Panthers or in coordination?
Yes,
or
I met Bunchy Carter and John Huggins, who who came from South LA, came to East LA to talk about working together, black and brown unity. And I got it, and Elridge Cleaver grew up in East LA, so we knew Elridge Cleaver, and I got a chance to go to Oakland. We would meet together and support each other in different marches and rallies. When we were arrested for the walkouts, the Black Panthers came to our defense and our support to raise money for bail. So we were at the Free Huey Newton rally at the Sports Arena in '68, where we had H. Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, Reyes Tijerina, all these phenomenal speakers.
Unbelievable.
It was some rich history.
Stokely Carmichael was actually,
right.
He lived in my neighborhood, on my block in the Bronx.
Really?
He did, on Stebbins Avenue. I was a little kid, so, I was not aware.
Wow.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of all of this stuff that was going on. But, he was from the Bronx in my neighborhood.
Wow, that is great. That is great. No, we always had a history of working together. The Black and Brown Civil Rights Movement, the Liberation Movement, and there's many other examples of with not only the Poor People's Campaign, but the Free Huey Newton campaign, the police brutality campaigns that we did. We also organized against the war in Vietnam because we realized that many of the blacks and Chicanos were being drafted and sent to Vietnam and dying in higher numbers than our population. So we took up the issue of protesting against the war in Vietnam. And one of the things that the Black Panther Party and the Brown Berets faced was the repression of the authorities, the infiltration by police, the FBI investigations to try to disrupt the organizations. So we supported each other during that period.
So now, in current day, modern day, surveillance is becoming more and more of an issue, particularly as we have technologies that make it easier, like drone technology and so on and so forth. Do you see any parallels between what's happening with?
No, absolutely. I mean, the FBI is still up to their same old tricks. They're using technology. Right, eavesdropping, etc. But believe it or not, they still do the old hat by going through your trash cans. 3 years ago, they were going through my trash cans right before they raided me.
And, wait! Raid? You can't just drop it like that and move on. Come on. What do you mean they raided you?
No, I mean, I didn't realize that I didn't tell you about it. But 3 years ago, the FBI and the SWAT team sheriff raided me. They were investigating me for domestic terrorism, right?
Oh, my God.
But before they did that, they did go through my trash can because I go out, get up in the morning, get my newspaper, and I go, "Hey, what are you doing?" I saw this woman going through my trash can, taking out a bunch of files that I'd thrown away.
Wow!
But,
so we want to let our listeners and viewers know that not everyone gets raided. And that civic engagement is everybody's responsibility.
Absolutely.
But I'd like to take my hat off to you for being brave enough to stay in the trenches even after being raided. I'm sure that you've experienced other negative consequences.
No, yes, you're right. Everyone should be involved, and not everyone's going to be raided. And I've been involved most of my life. I've been arrested at least half a dozen times. Or actually, no, not a half a dozen, a dozen times. And the last time I was bailed out, by the way, I got bailed out at 5 in the morning. I'm in pajamas with no money, nothing, just,
Oh my goodness.
And but it's due to my activism. I not only do I organize locally in a community to improve the quality of life, or whether it be education, immigration reform, and the environment, but I also do a lot of solidarity, anti-war work. And that's where the API gets real nervous when we start talking about not only Mexico and Vietnam, but Colombia, the U.S. involvement in Colombia, the whole question of Palestine, that's where after 9/11, the U.S. Government has gotten very, very uptight, and anyone who protests or is in solidarity with folks throughout the world that just want to be free, whether it's in Africa or in Asia, they want to be free of and be sovereign democratic countries. And we support them by going in fact-finding trips. I've been to Colombia several times, and I come back to the United States and I talk about the human rights violations that occur there against the Afro-Colombian people who are being displaced from their land, against the peasants, the labor leaders that are being assassinated. So that's why I'm being investigated and
So how can people learn more about that? Because there are people who don't have the wherewithal to go down to Colombia and to become engaged that way. But engagement takes on many shades.
Sure, absolutely.
What are some of the things that people at home right here in Los Angeles could do to support that?
No, on their own block. Like for example, I'm also involved in the Boyle Heights Neighborhood Council. I'm the president of Boyle Heights Neighborhood Council, and we take up the issues of quality of life. We moved to shut down a battery recycling plant in Vernon that was polluting the community with lead and arsenic. We took up that issue, the issue of promoting and saving our parks, the issue of stopping the car checkpoints in our community. Many people in our community don't have papers, so can't get a license. So they're victims of police checkpoints where they impound their car for 30 days. So we deal with the bread and butter survival issues. And I always remind folks, we need to focus on our community, but whatever happens in Africa and Asia does affect us.
Right.
Here in Colombia, you have the issue of drugs, and in our community, as we all know, we can do a whole show on that.
That's right. So I have an image that Richard, who so graciously helps us in producing the show. We have a slide where it shows the Los Angeles Neighborhood Council, and I understand that there are more than 95, or there are 95 certified neighborhood councils in the city of Los Angeles. And what is the purpose of these neighborhood councils?
The purpose is for the community to advocate for a better quality of life in their neighborhoods, to identify a specific problem or issue and advocate before the city council in their community to solve those issues. We took up the issue of pollution, our parks. Boyle Heights is one of the most polluted areas in the city of LA. I think Wilmington is number one. We're number two. So in other communities, there may be other issues. It may be gentrification, maybe traffic, it may be housing. So the neighborhood councils were elected by the community, and the community is invited to come and bring up issues. We always listen to the community. We have workshops, and we're always working with our community to identify those important issues. Whether it's in one situation, in my case, there was a group of ladies who said, the pet waste. Everybody's got a pet, nobody's picking up the waste. So we took up that issue, how to educate people to pick up the waste, because it was creating a health hazard. And
so I wanted to fast forward to how Sharon and I got to know you over the past few months. We all were together at the last few steps of the Raise LA campaign to raise the minimum wage for hotel workers in LA City. How did you get involved in that, and why?
I don't recall exactly how I got involved, but I do know that we found out that there's several thousand, maybe up to 8,000 hotel workers that live in Boyle Heights.
Right.
So that's important to us. The quality of life, specifically your income, is we have a large percentage of low-income residents in Boyle Heights. And I met with some of the folks that have been retired or are still working in the hotel industry, and they said, yeah, you're right, we work hard, and only when we get a union and fight for better wages does it improve. But the wages are still low. And we had a meeting of the Boyle Heights Neighborhood Council. We had a presentation by the Raise LA, And that's how I got involved, by listening to our community and going to a meeting, and we actually passed a community impact statement with the Boyle Heights Neighborhood Council calling for support of the Raise LA campaign. And we went
So
to
that
City
was-
Hall. We went to City Hall, right? We spoke at City Hall.
That's right.
That was a pretty exciting, I mean, the way that worked, because we've talked about right up until the last minute, at least the insiders were saying the vote was going to be really close. And then we filled the hall with all those union workers, and the vote wasn't close at all. It was really exciting, especially in these times when a lot of the water is flowing the other way, especially in national politics. It was pretty exciting. So
Yes.
what's going to be? I know you're into the follow up to that. What's next with that?
Well, the next campaign, and you're right, it was very exciting to win a victory, because sometimes victories are few and far between, right?
Right.
So, but the next campaign is to raise the minimum wage to $15 for the whole city of LA.
And just
And,
for our listeners, there are some people who don't actually know what the minimum wage is. You know, some people are fortunate enough and are far removed enough that they don't even know what it is. So right now it's at $9 an hour.
I believe
I
so,
think it's
right.
$9 an hour. So what we did, this broad coalition did with the Raise LA campaign a couple of months ago, was we raised the wages of hotel workers from $9 an hour to I think it's $15.37 an hour
Right.
in one fell swoop.
Right. One
Boom.
big vote,
I mean,
right.
that's a huge increase, which is going to
It
have a
is.
huge impact on the community. So,
Absolutely.
And so, but
It's a
what
great
excites
victory.
me about this is, yeah, we have victories.
We can do it. We
we,
did
we
it.
can do
Right.
stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah, you don't have to be an elected official to make a
That-
change.
Absolutely. And you
Yeah,
don't
and
have
part of the argument for Boyle Heights and other places, I mean, with all those thousands of hotel workers in Boyle Heights, I mean, they're not going to spend that extra $5, $6, $7 an hour they're making. They're not going to put that in a Swiss bank account.
No.
They're going to spend it in the local grocery store. They're going
Absolutely.
to have after-school programs for their kids. It's going to make the whole community stronger. At least I think so.
I totally agree. You know, our community will spend the money. You know, we're high consumers. We all
Right.
like to shop. You know, and we'll spend the money back into our community.
So, what
So,
other kinds of victories have you seen?
Well, education, the victories of education. We in Boyle Heights, our schools are overcrowded. We fought to construct a new high school. We were able to get a new high school built in Boyle Heights. Absolutely. You know,
Nice.
we had the issue of privatization. Some of the privatization companies were trying to move in and take over our high school, and we're able to organize with parents and students and teachers to stop an attempt to take over a school and make it a charter school. So we kept it public. We've recently won some elections. You know, I'm real happy that that Tom Torlakson won.
Right.
In that victory.
Well, I know that the parents in Boyle Heights, particularly the moms,
Right.
they have a reputation for being some of the strongest advocates for their children, actively engaged in their schools. And I like to think that a lot of that activism that we see with the moms has to do with activists like you, showing, being a model.
Well, I mean, I think it's a combination of that the parents see the need. I mean, one thing that I really admire, and I get inspired by the activist moms. They may not have a degree. They might not even have papers or money or anything,
That's
right? Or
right.
even a job. But they are the strongest fighters in our community.
For their children.
When they see an injustice, they will move. And I'm always been a strong believer of working with the moms in the community, and they're the ones that kept me out of jail free over the years. You know, they go to court and they raise money and pay the attorneys and bail you out, and they are the strongest fighter in our community. Absolutely.
So we've seen Rhonda was thrust into activism by the situation around her friend and mentee, Maitrice Richardson. But you have been in there for a long time, and obviously you must be getting something deeply important out of 47 years of activism. Could you describe what that is? I assume most of this is done on your own dime.
It is, absolutely. Primarily volunteer. You know, I worked for a union for 3 years one time, SCIU.
Uh-huh.
Of course, I was organizing workers, and
Right.
I did it such a good job that I got fired.
Oh.
You're right. But no, I mean, I'm inspired by the victories, by the people every day. You meet people from all ages, all walks of life, and they all have a story to tell, and they share. You know, when I hear the story, and also I get inspired when they come forward and they take the leadership role, especially young folks nowadays that are really coming forward and are getting involved in immigration reform and defending public education, also on the environmental front here in Boyle Heights and East LA. So that's what keeps me going, the people that come forward and they come with their story and they want to fight back.
So it seems to me that no matter how many victories there are, there's always a few steps back. I know that what happened in Arizona with SB 1070, thank God that didn't, the Supreme Court knocked it down. But there always seems to be an effort. I think it's really important that stories like yours are told so that the new generation that comes in knows that these were hard-fought battles that were won at one time and can be won again. So what would you say to students that are right now, like the dreamers, and what would you say to them to keep them going? Because I can't believe, you've been in the trenches a long time, and yet you're still out there.
I'm still at it. Well, the dreamers are great. They're phenomenal. They're very motivated. They're the greatest leaders, one of the greatest leaders in our community. And they've done a lot of things. They stepped forward and did civil disobedience and pressured Obama to pass the the deferred action. If it wasn't for them doing massive civil disobedience a few years ago, and they showed us that, hey, we've got to, they inspired me to continue fighting.
So what's your thoughts on the possibility, even this week, that President Obama would use executive action to better the lives of 5 million undocumented immigrants?
I believe he's going to do it finally. We've been, pressuring and waiting for a long time, and I think he realized that with the Republicans, they're not going to do anything, so it's time for him to act. And I think he will do it, and we're hoping that it'd be an extensive, wide-ranging deferred action, not just for a few, because we have deferred action for the dreamers, the young folks, but what about their parents? What about their brothers and sisters, their grandma, their grandfather? You can't exclude them. You can't divide the family.
Right.
So we're asking him to do an extensive, wide-ranging deferred action for all.
I must disagree, though. I think the Republicans do want to do something.
Okay.
It's called the border and the 82nd Airborne.
Yeah, they want to militarize the border. You're right.
Militarize the border, and everything is just so connected. So we've spent so much on the Department of Defense budget. We've spent so much, in fact, that the Department of Defense can afford to send some of these weaponry to militarize the borders, to militarize our urban police forces. Some of them, they have tanks and they have drones, and we're sitting here waiting to hear what's going to happen in Ferguson. It seems to me that the work of an activist just never ends.
It never ends, but the key to it is you have to work collectively and work in organization. I've always worked in organizations and collectively, not as an individual.
Right.
I'm here talking as myself, but
Right.
I've always been part of an organization, part of a mass movement.
Right.
And a part of community building.
So can you name some of those organizations? We talked about the neighborhood councils.
Sure. Uh-huh.
What other kinds of organizations? I know that Cheerla is one that is really out there a lot.
What that exists today that are doing
Today,
Cheerla,
for people that would
Carecen.
want to get involved, if they were to do a Google search, who would they look to get involved?
Right, you're right. The Carecen, the Central American Resource Center, Cheerla. There are a lot of student groups in different colleges, the Black Student Union, the Students for Democratic Society, Dream Networks. There's a whole series of Dream students have different names, AB 540 or Dream Network. There's also the Chicano student movement. It's called MECHA, Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán. So in the student world, I would say MECHA, SDS, or Black Student Union. And then in the community, the different parent groups in the schools, parent advisory groups. In Boyle Heights, we have Unión de Vecinos, Inquilinos Unidos. We have a core community service organization. We have different unions that are involved with, I think most of the unions, the SCIUs, the AFSMEs. And then there's a lot of cultural youth groups also that are involved taking up different issues. So, I mean, if you go Google activism or pick your issue, I think what I tell most folks is that where you live at or where you work, there's something going on. Look at it, think about it, talk to your coworkers, talk to your neighbors, and sit down and do a plan and take it up, and it starts off with a small victory and you move on to the bigger victory. And then unite citywide with all of us when we march on May 1st for International Workers' Day.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Carlos Montes,
You're
for
welcome.
sharing with us that huge body of experience and deep knowledge about activism. We're going to take a break, and we will be back in 1 minute. Stay with us.
Talk Live Broadcast Network, original reality radio, handcrafted for your listening and viewing pleasure. This is LA Talk Live, and we are more than just talk. Stay tuned.
Hi, this is Randy Franklin inviting you to join me every Thursday at 5 p.m. for my show, Probable Cause. Join me while I dissect current events, talk about laws, and answer your law enforcement questions. So don't forget to tune in to Probable Cause every Thursday at 5 p.m. exclusively on latalklive.com. You can also catch us on iTunes Radio R&B, TuneIn Radio, Radio Flag, and AHA Radio. Or watch and listen directly at latalklive.com. Reality radio, handcrafted for your listening and viewing pleasure. Hi, I'm Randy Franklin, and this is LA Talk Live, and we are more than just talk.
Hey, y'all, I'm Shaquem Williams, and I'm the host of The Shock Factor here on LA Talk. We broadcast to the world every Friday at 8 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Live music, live performances. We're just live. Chef Momo, Erica Ash, and once again, your host, Shaquem Williams. Thank you. So come join every Friday here at LA Talk Live, the world-leading broadcasting internet radio station. The Shock.
A nation planted, so
Welcome back to LA Progressive Live with your hosts Sharon Kyle and Dick Price. You're joining us live streaming at LA Talk Live.
Thanks, Dick. So in studio, we have Dr. Rhonda Hampton and Carlos Montes, two activists that have really been just giving us all kinds of information as to ways that we can stay engaged. Now, Rhonda, in addition to the documentary that you've been involved in, there's also a nonprofit. Why don't you tell us about the nonprofit, how people can find it, and its mission?
So after after we just found her body, along the way I met so many people who had needed help with finding their missing loved ones, and so together myself with my partner Connie Lum up north, we started a nonprofit, Reach for Mental Health Awareness, where we actually outreach to families who have missing and mentally ill adults, and that is just very, very rewarding work for both of us, making sure that these families have everything in place that they need to search for their loved ones.
Wow, it's so heartbreaking. When you're bringing this up, it kind of reminds me that you and I talked briefly about my mom, who has Alzheimer's.
Yes.
And I've been very fortunate to find a good place for my mom.
Yeah.
But during that 2-year period where I was looking for some place for her, it became so clear to me how vulnerable she was and how vulnerable so many people with mental illness. I mean, how often is it that people just kind of just disappear? It must be a big problem.
So a little bit over 600,000 people have gone missing in the last year, and about a third of that are diagnosed or known to have a mental illness. And when I say mental illness, we're talking about a mental health crisis. So that could be someone who has Alzheimer's. In fact, right now I'm currently working with a family who has a family member, Sally Estabrook, who is missing in the Julian area. She's been missing for more than 6 weeks now, and just kind of wandered off with Alzheimer's. Then there's those who might have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or just distraught over like the breakup of a boyfriend or a girlfriend or something, a life crisis that's caused them to, wander, go off.
So for those that are listening, like in the case of my mom, early on in the progression of her Alzheimer's, it wasn't always obvious that she had Alzheimer's.
Right.
In fact, neither my sister nor I really understood the depth of the illness until somehow we found out that she'd paid her gas bill like 10 times in 1 month, and then we know something very wrong is going on. But one time, my mom hitched a ride and got into a stranger's car. Yeah. And so for people who kind of think something's wrong, but they're not sure, who would they call? What would they do?
So the best thing to do is when you think something's going wrong, like in the case of your mom, is really to go to your healthcare provider and describe the symptoms. Things that seem odd to you, oftentimes they're odd behavior, we don't realize there's an underlying medical condition going on. And normally your general practice doctor can make an appropriate referral.
I see. Well, thank you so much.
So it sounds like you've got your feet firmly planted in activism now.
Yes, I'm getting more comfortable with that. I'm really excited about the nonprofit work. That just brings joy to my heart. And I'll tell you, because I don't think I'm a born activist. Through the nonprofit work, there are many people who are born activists, and they come and they volunteer in many ways, and they keep me uplifted, and they provide me support and guidance. And that, so for those who aren't naturally born activists, surrounding yourself with people who are definitely is a must-do.
So, Carlos, you mentioned that you have a couple things going on in your neck of the woods?
There's always something going on. And, for example, on this Thursday at 4 o'clock, there's a rally at Mariachi Plaza at the corner of First and Boyle to support public education. The Teachers Union is organizing that, UTLA. They've invited us to be there. We have the Mariachi Festival on November 23rd. That's always a lot of fun, a whole wealth of food and mariachis. Food and mariachis.
I'm
there. And you're all welcome to come to the next Boyle Heights Neighborhood Council meeting, which is November 25th at 7 p.m. Our website is bhnc.net to look at other activities.
And then you mentioned that you have some personal goals that are coming to the fore.
For example, yes, absolutely. I'm running for LA City Council, 14th District. I just announced last Thursday. People have been asking me to run for years. I've always said no, but they put a plan together where we can win on March the 3rd. So
good
details
luck.
To come.
So wait a minute. So a radical activist like you is joining the establishment?
I know it. But I'm going to be fighting hard. I'm not going to sell out. People are telling me, you don't sell out, Carlos, like all the rest. I haven't sold out all these years. I'm sure not going to sell out now.
But people talk about sellouts and talk about how politicians change.
Right.
I mean, we all know politicians who we knew before they became politicians, and then once they get into office, they change.
Right.
But, I've always thought that part of the reason that they change is because they don't have the kind of support that they need. If we had a populace that was really engaged, like Dick and I frequently talk about one election in our congressional district, one midterm election, the turnout was like 7-8%. Can you believe that? With only 7 or 8% of the people turning out to vote, can you blame the politician for not being responsive to their needs?
That's right, Sharon.
They don't even vote.
That's true. And the corporations get to them.
Yeah.
And my difference, I'm not a career politician. and I have a base of people that I work with, and they'll certainly hold me accountable. But I'm not.
Wonderful.
But I'm not a career politician.
Well,
I'm
I'll
only
hold you
going to-
accountable.
Yeah, thank you.
If you win, and
Sharon,
I will hold you accountable.
I know
telling
you
people.
will, and I want you to. The first motion I'm going to make, I'm going to walk in there and I'll make a motion to stop the police car impound checkpoints in Walhalla in the city. And let's see.
So we also have our
And-
own piece of activism.
Okay.
We're
That's
deeply
right, Dick.
involved in the ACLU. And in our neck of the woods in Pasadena, we're going to have a forum tomorrow night
Oh.
at 7 o'clock. It's called News After Snowden, Journalism in the Age of Government Suppression and Advocacy Media. We've got 3 really good panelists, Brad Parker, an author and activist, Carla Hall, LA Times editorial writer, and Kevin Urich, the editor of the Pasadena Weekly. So we'd really love to have you come. The information is up on laprogressive.com.
That's right, and this is an educational forum on a topic that people really need to know about, because we all need the press, and we can't have a democracy without free press. So, well, I think that kind of brings us to a closure. I hear that Richard's just turning up the music.
Right.
Our favorite song, "What Color Is Love?"
And we'll be back here next Monday, 3 o'clock Pacific, on LA Talk Live, LA Progressive Talk.
And we'd like to thank LA Talk Live for their supreme, wonderful support.
And our 2 guests, Rhonda and Carlos. Thank you so much for making the long drive all the way across LA. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you next week.
Is love. Is it strong like the mountains, or deep like a fountain that's flowing free? And what about me? How can you receive if you're not a believer? Is it blue like the sky? And does it really reach that high? What color is love? Is it near or is it far? Is it distant like a star? What color is love? Does it glow like an ember? And do you remember if love doesn't last? Does it live in the past? And a heart cannot live if a heart isn't giving. When it's over, does it show? Does it leave an afterglow? And I really want to know what color is love.
We know there are many choices in internet radio, and the staff and host of LA Talk Live would like to thank you for choosing the internet's hottest destination for the most eclectic sound and invigorating talk. This is LA Talk Live. We are more than just talk.